Hello friends, the topic for the presentation is clinical trial and I am Dr. Kulkarni. The lesson objectives for the presentation are that at the end of the presentation, the participants would be able to describe what is a clinical trial, what are the steps in a clinical trial, and ethical and other issues in the clinical trial. A clinical trial is a popular type of epidemiological study. It involves studying the effect of intervention with a drug. So whenever the intervention is drug, it is called as a clinical trial. But if the intervention is done on healthy individuals, it is called as a community trial. If the intervention involves the administration of the vaccine, it is called the vaccine trial. The clinical trials need follow-up for a specified period. The participants are required to be followed for a specified period, and hence the observations are conducted at the start of the study and at the end, and hence they are also longitudinal type of the studies. The interventions in a clinical trial could involve a new drug, it could involve new dose regime or regimes, it could involve trial of a new route or routes of administration, comparison of new route or routes of administration with the established route of transmission, new combination or combinations of the drug, and nutritional interventions for therapeutic purposes. This is a general study design for a typical clinical trial. We have a reference population, which is a conceptual entity, and it will be explained a bit later in the later stages. On this reference population, we apply the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Because of this, we get experimental population, which is a well-defined entity because of the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So reference population is a conceptual entity, whereas experimental population is a well-defined entity due to inclusion and exclusion criteria. From the experimental population, then we draw a sample, the size of which will depend on the statistical advice. From this, because due to the sampling, we get what we call as a study population or the study group of individuals. This is then divided into control group and study group. There could be more than one study groups, and the process by which the study population or experimental population is divided into control group and the study group or groups is called as randomization. These are the steps in a typical clinical trial. These are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Some of the steps may involve these steps may be carried out simultaneously with other steps, so they could be parallelly run. So this is not an exclusive list, but generally these are the steps in a typical clinical trial, and we will discuss each of these steps in further details. The decision of a clinical trial is the first step, and it is taken after a careful thought. That means it is not a random decision, or it is not a decision which is taken as per the whims of the principal investigator. There has to be some proof for conducting the clinical trial, or some information is required before conducting a clinical trial. So the thought process involves first, is the trial really required? So this decision depends on whether there are problems with the existing drug and whether these problems are likely to be solved with the new drug. The established line of treatment may be too prolonged, so the new drug may be involving shortening the duration. The route of administration of the established line of treatment may be inconvenient to the patients, and the new drug could be given by a route of administration which is acceptable by the participants. So these could be some of the advantages of the new drug, and that may necessitate, or the new drug may be cheaper than the old drug, and hence we require to undertake the clinical trial. So these things will decide whether the trial is really required. That is the problem with the existing drug, and those must be identified and must be addressed to in the trial of the new drug. Then the next question is, can it be done? This involves the feasibility issues, that whether the sufficient number of the participants are available, sufficient number of the patients suffering from the disease under question, whether they are available in the institution under you, under the principal investigator, that is you are the conducting the trial, whether the diagnostic facilities for the disease are available, whether any complications are foreseen with the new drug, and whether the facilities for the treatment are available with the institution or not. So these feasibility issues must be addressed to, and if you get the satisfactory answers, then only you should proceed for the clinical trial. Then there has to be some proof of the safety of the drug, and this could be from the animal studies, or this could be from the earlier phases of the clinical trial. The clinical trial involves 4 phases apart from the phase 0, which is in vitro studies. This discussion relates to the phase 3 types of the trials. So these are in the later stages. The phase 3 trials, which we will be discussing, come in the later stage of the studies. So some proof of safety must be obtained from the phase 1 and phase 2 studies. There should the proof of the efficacy comes from the phase 2 and phase 3 studies. So we are conducting the phase 3 studies. We are describing here the phase 3 studies. So the proof of safety and efficacy should come from the phase 1 and phase 2 studies and from the animal studies. Then there has to be some ethical and administrative clearance. The ethical clearance comes from the institutional ethical committee, and administrative clearances come from the head of the institute where you are conducting the study, head of the institutes. If other institutes are also involved, that means it is a multicentric trial, then the head of the institutions of all these institutions are required to be consulted, and their clearance is to be obtained. Then the clearance from the other diagnostic departments, if the diagnostic facilities of those departments are going to be required and utilized. So they must also give the clearance for conducting the study. If no phase 3 studies have been conducted previously, and only phase 1 and phase 2 studies have been conducted, then the clearance from the drug departments of the state or the country is required. that administrative clearance is also required. So these are few of the examples of administrative and ethical clearances. Of this, ethical is from the ethical committee, and administrative clearance from the various institutions and the departments. Then the trial has to be registered. After you get approval from the ethics committee, the trial has to be registered with the trial registry of the country. In India, the trials are required to be registered at this website, ctri.gov.in. For other countries, they are required to be registered, and there is a different procedure for the other countries. But in India, it is the ctri.gov.in, which is the registering authority. If you register the trial with the ctri.gov.in, they give you a unique identification number, and that number helps others to identify and get information about your trial. That information, or the unique identification number, is also required by the journals when you publish the reports of your study. Then the next is the framing the research question and hypothesis. The research question in clinical trial is of association or difference type. So if your research question is not of association or difference type, then clinical trial is not indicated, and some other studies, that is analytical studies, may be indicated. If the OE is the outcome in the experimental group and OC is the outcome in the control group, then you have got 3 types of hypothesis in clinical trial. These are the superiority hypothesis, the non-inferiority hypothesis, and equivalence hypothesis. In null hypothesis, In superiority hypothesis, again, there are two components of it. One is the null hypothesis, and the second one is the study hypothesis or the superiority hypothesis itself. The null hypothesis states that the OE is equal to OC, that is, outcome in experimental group is equal to the outcome in the control group. This is a statistical requirement. And the alternate hypothesis or study hypothesis or the superiority hypothesis states that OE is better than OC. Now, if OE, that is outcome, is a cure rate, then it means that the cure rate in experimental group is higher than the cure rate in the control group. If outcome is death or mortality rate, then the superiority hypothesis states that the outcome in experimental group, that is mortality in the experimental group, is lesser than the mortality in the control group. So that is how the hypothesis is stated in superiority hypothesis. In non-inferiority hypothesis, the statement is that the outcome in experimental group is not better than the outcome in the control group, but it is not inferior also. So if the outcome in the experimental group is the cure rate, then the non-inferiority hypothesis states that it is not less than the outcome in the control group. If outcome is the mortality, then the non-inferiority hypothesis states that the death rate in the experimental group is not more than the death rate in the control group. So in non-inferiority hypothesis, outcome is not inferior to the outcome in the control group. In equivalence hypothesis, we have to state that outcome in experimental group is equivalent to the outcome in the control group. So in equivalence study, we have to set up the equivalence margin, and it has to be stated before starting the study, before the sample size required for the study is calculated. In fact, that is one of the major requirements for calculating the sample size. So if OE is within, that is outcome in experimental group is within the plus minus equivalence limits of the OC, the equivalence limit hypothesis is stated. Suppose the cure rate with the control group is 80%. Suppose the cure rate with the control group is 80% and the equivalence limit setup is say 2%. Then the outcome in experimental group, that is the cure rate in the experimental group, should be OC, that is the outcome in control group, plus minus 2%. So if the outcome in the control group is 80 plus minus 2%, that is within the range of 78 to 82%, then we say that it is within the equivalence margin and equivalence hypothesis is therefore satisfied. If it is beyond this range, then the equivalence hypothesis is not satisfied and it is not accepted. The next step is defining the population. There are two types of the populations which are required to be defined. One is the reference population to whom the results will apply. As said previously, the reference population is a conceptual entity. For example, all typhoid patients. So our results will be applicable on all typhoid patients anywhere in any institution, something like that. But it is a conceptual entity. This needs to be refined in the form of study population. The study population is the population from where the participants will be enrolled. The study population is a clear, operationally feasible entity. So the study population is defined in such a way that it becomes clear and operationally it becomes feasible to say whether an individual belongs to the study population or not. That means whether the person is eligible to be included in the study or not. The one way by which it could be study population could be defined is like the typhoid patients admitted to hospital X or hospital X, X1, X2, X3 and so on and so forth. So this is the way the study population is defined. Further refining the study population could be done by applying the inclusion and exclusion criteria. the trial relates to the new drug in typhoid, then the inclusion criteria may say that the only new typhoid cases will be included. Only those cases which are diagnosed by culture will be included. Only those cases the age of whom is between 11 to 60 years will be included, and the cases of both gender will be included. So new typhoid cases diagnosed by culture and age 11 to 60 years and both the genders is the inclusion criteria. Exclusion criteria is those with complications. If the patient of typhoid has complications like perforation of intestine or enteric encephalopathy, then we say at the time of entry in the study, then we say that the person is not eligible to be included in the study. If the person has got these complications, then he is not eligible to be included in the study. If he is without these complications, then he is eligible to be included in the study. Those with the associated disease like diabetes, if the person has got diabetes and the enteric fever, then the person will not be included in the study. So stating the inclusion and exclusion criteria explicitly help in refining the study population. Then the next and important step, often neglected in clinical trials, is the sample size determination. It is calculated with certain assumptions which are stated before the sample size is calculated and before the study is calculated. In fact, the feasibility of the study can be based on sample size. If the sample size is too large, that may make the study not feasible in the given circumstances. The other reason why the sample size requirement is required is that the results become invalid if the study is on lesser size sample, or the number of individuals included is less than the sample size calculated by the statistics. It requires therefore the help of the statisticians. Nowadays there are many softwares which can calculate the sample size for you, but they will have to be given certain information. The statistician will be requiring this information. Even the softwares require this information. And what is this information required? These are called as the assumptions for calculating the sample size. One is the alpha error and the second one is the beta error. What is alpha error and beta error is a matter of a separate lecture, and therefore it will not be discussed over here. But the alpha limit is usually set at 5% and the beta error is set as 20%. So an alpha error more than 5% or beta error more than 20% is not acceptable. So you will have to set the alpha error somewhere either at 5% or less than 5%. Similarly, the beta error will have to be set up at 20% or less than 20%. Then you require some estimates of the outcome in the experimental group and outcome in the control group. This can be obtained from literature or from the pilot study. As I have already said that this discussion relates mostly to the phase 3 studies. So in phase 3 studies, the estimates of the outcome in the in the experimental group and outcome in the control group can be obtained from previous phase 1 and phase 2 studies. If it is a phase 2 study, you are conducting the phase 2 studies, then you will have to conduct some pilot study. But for phase 3 study, you cannot say that there is no information available on the estimates of the outcome in the experimental group or outcome in the control group. Outcome in the control group, the information should be available because it is the established line of treatment. But information for the outcome in the experimental group can be obtained from previous phase 2 and phase 1 trials. Then the next thing which is required in the superiority hypothesis is the precision with which you want to detect the difference between the OE, that is the outcome in experimental group, and OC, that is the outcome in the control group. The precision has to be a value which is less than the difference between the outcome in the experimental group and outcome in the control group. Suppose the outcome in the experimental group, the estimate is say 80%, and the outcome in the control group is say 75%, and in fact that's why you want to take a phase 3 trial. So the difference in the outcome and the experimental group is of 5%. So the precision level has to be less than 5%. The precision that is set up must be less than 5%. If the estimate of the difference between the outcome in the experimental and outcome in the control group is 5%, then the precision has to be set to a level which is less than 5%. Usually a level of 20 to 20% of the difference of OE and OC is considered adequate. Then the sixth step required to be described is enrolling the participants. The participants are considered enrolled only after the diagnosis is made by the standard method of diagnosis. And the standard method of diagnosis must be mentioned in the material and methods. For example, for typhoid patients, it may be culture of the blood culture or stool culture may be the standard method of diagnosis considered for diagnosis of the typhoid in a given case. The participant is considered enrolled only after informed consent is obtained from the participants in the manner prescribed by the Indian Council of Medical Research if the study is conducted in our country, that is India. So the participants are considered enrolled only after the diagnosis is made by standard method of diagnosis and informed consent is obtained in a manner prescribed and accepted by the Institutional Ethics Committee, which operates as per guidelines of Indian Council of Medical Research in India. The next step is the randomized allocation. This is the soul of a clinical trial. And it has to be a scientifically correct method of allocation, and some of the methods are described here. Randomization in allocation means method by which the participants are allocated to study and control group, and this allocation is not as per the whims of the principal investigator, but it is done by a method which is scientifically accepted as random. Random doesn't mean haphazard. Random means scientifically done allocation. The prerequisite is that the prediction of allocation should not be possible before it is actually done. So whether the person will go to this experimental group or whether the person will go to the control group, the prediction of this should not be possible to the principal investigator or the person undertaking the allocation. So that is the sole criteria to decide whether the allocation method is random or not. Coin tossing is a really random method of allocation, but it is useful only in two groups because there are only two options when you toss a coin. Either it will be head or it is a tail. But the drawback is that it may result in unequal allocation if the number is small. Suppose if the total number of included in the trial is 30 and you want 15 to be included in the experimental group and 15 in the control group, and you therefore you toss the coin 30 times. For the first time for the first individual, second time for the second individual, and 30th time for the 30th individual. These 30 tosses may not necessarily result in 30 heads and 30 tails. Sometimes it may be 17 and 13, sometimes it may be 18 and 12, and rarely it will be 15, 15, it may be 16, 14. So it may result in unequal allocation. Suppose you say if it is head, the person goes to the study group or the experimental group, and if it is tail, the person goes to the control group. And if you have 16 heads and 14 tails, then there will be 60 persons going to the study group and 14 persons going to the control group if the total sample size is 30. So it is not practicable, and this method has been mentioned here only to complete the list. The second method is use of sealed envelopes. We prepare or we have the envelopes of the number which is equal to n, and n is the total sample size. N1 is the size for the study group or the experimental group, and N2 is the number for the control group. So we have small papers equal to the number n, so equal to this number, total number. Similar size, this paper should be of the similar size look and color, and they should be small so that we should be able to write on it, and they should be small enough so that they could be put in a small envelope. So on n1 number of small papers, these small papers which are similar in size, look and color, we write study group and put them one each in the envelopes. So we have the envelopes, the number of which is equal to n1, on which we have put a small paper on which we have written study group or the experimental group. On the remaining, that is n2 number of small papers, we write control group and put one each in the remaining envelopes. So the number of envelopes and the number of small papers is equal to the total number. The number of small papers and envelopes in which the papers are written study group equal to n1, and the number of the papers and envelopes with the control group will be equal to n2. Then we mix these envelopes like the pack of cards. Each time we have to allocate a person. The first person comes, we mix, we take all the cards, all the envelopes and mix them like a pack of cards and offer it to the person for whom the allocation is to be done. He draws one envelope. So we take that envelope and read the paper on which suppose it is written study group. Then that person is allocated to the study group, and the person receives the treatment that is decided for the study group. If that is control group, then the person is allocated to the control group and the person receives the treatment for the control group. Now next time we have one envelope less than n, one envelope less than 1. So second person comes, we offer the envelopes which are mixed and are offered to the second person. That person takes one envelope, we open and read, and whatever is written to that group the person goes. It could be study group or control group. So that the last this procedure is repeated for all the participants till the envelopes are exhausted and all the papers on which we have written are read. So in this case, the only person in whom the prediction is possible is probably the last person because that we can find out from how many previous persons, among the previous persons, which group they were allocated to. That is the only person in whom the prediction of allocation will be possible. So this is one of favorite allocation or randomization method if the number of the individuals in the study, that is n, is reasonably small. Then this is a method of permuted blocks. This method is called as, the method which I will be describing now is called as method of permutation blocks. It is useful for multicentric studies. If the study is conducted at more than one centers, this is useful. It can be operated separately for strata like gender. You want equal number of males in, say, study group and control group. You want equal number of females to go to study and control group. For that also, this method is very helpful. It needs an independent person who will be called as a randomizer, and he should be accessible to all the centers in which the study is going to be conducted. So the centers can contact this randomizer by the pre-decided method of contact. It may be by telephonic or through internet something, but that must be decided, and he must be available at any time for the advice for the person who is doing the study at the peripheral centers. Now what is this permuted blocks? Permuted blocks are nothing but the permutation and combination of the two letters. The E is say for the experimental group and C is for the control group. And these permutation and combinations could be for four permutation and combinations, 6 permutation and combination, 8. So they should be even number. Mostly it is four possible combinations are there, and on one paper we write EECC, means there are 4 possible allocations to the first patient. So now suppose in the and these 4 EECC is written on small papers and they are put in the envelopes, and we exhaust all the permutation and combinations of 2E and 2Cs. So permutation and combinations are calculated, and equal number of that many number of envelopes have what these sheets, small papers written on it accordingly. Suppose it is the first center and the male patient comes over here. So the person of the peripheral center contacts the center, contacts the person whom we call as a randomizer. So he is contacted and he is told that this is center number 1 speaking, and the patient who has fulfilled the inclusion exclusion criteria and is a male patient. All other things have been fulfilled. So the person in the central station will then draw out the first envelope on which it may be written EECC. So 4 possible combinations are there. Since this is the first person, the first letter is E, which denotes experimental group. So that first male patient in the first center goes to the experimental group. Now suppose if it is the second center, and here the female patient comes, the first female patient comes. So the allocator draws the envelopes which are labeled as center number 2 and female patients. So those envelopes only will be drawn on which it is written center number 2 and female patients, and the first envelope will be drawn and the paper will be read, and on it will be written C. So that patient will go to the control group. Now if on the contrary for the second center the first patient is the male, so here again the first patient will go to the experimental group. Like this. Now this same paper on which the first patient has been allocated, he will cancel this, put a cross mark over there, which means this option has been exhausted for the first patient of the first center, like this over here. So in this case the options the second center for the male patients, 2 options have been exhausted, and now the third patient comes in the second center. So the third patient will naturally go to the control group, because the first patient, who was the male, has gone to the experimental group, the second has gone to the control group, the third will go to the control group, and the fourth will go to the experimental group. So like this, all options for the males, all options for the females in the first center and the second center and the third center are exhausted. Then we prepare the further list if the sample size required is more than what is required. So once these 4 options are exhausted, 4 options of male patients in the first center are exhausted, then we go for the second envelope in which the sequence is different. Here the sequence was EECC, here the sequence is different, here the sequence is again different, here again it is different, and so these are the possible permutations for the center. So it will go accordingly, and in the end, when all options, all the 4 options are exhausted, we will have equal number of male and female patients in the trial, equal number of male and female centers, female patients for a given center also. We will have equal numbers. So that is how it is done. This is called as a randomization by permuted blocks with 4-letter blocks. Similarly, it could be extended, these letters could be extended 6 letters, and permutations and combinations for the 2 letters with the 6 possible possibilities can be worked out. The randomization for large trials in the multicentric study are nowadays done with the allocation with the help of software programs. Here there is a central allocation center which is connected to the peripheral centers, and the peripheral centers can contact the computer of the central station and feed this information which is required, and the program is there which asks for the requisite information. If that is fed, then the center then intimates the allocation, whether the person will be allocated to the control group or the study group, something like that. So if it is a large trial involving many centers, many countries, and there are many options in the study group number 1, study group number 2, something like this, and then there are many groups also, like males and females, different age groups are there, then it is better to have the advice of the software personnel and prepare a software program for the allocation. Then there is the implementation of regime, and in the implementation, one important activity is blinding. This is also called as masking. It is for the removal of bias in the assessment, that if one knows that it is an experimental group and the person assessing the outcome is biased towards the experimental group, then he may report the favorable result for the experimental group. So in order to avoid that type of bias, the blinding is done, which is also called as masking. And it could be a single blinding, double blind trial, or triple blind trials. Single blind, when the participant or the patient does not know to which group he or she belongs to. Blinding is called double blind if the participant, that is the patient, and the person assessing the effect of the drug doesn't know to which group the participant has gone to. And the triple blinding is done to mask the blinding, to mask the allocation to the analyzer, the person who is analyzing, or the statistician who is analyzing the information. So single blind when the patient only is blinded or masked, double blind when the participant, that is the patient, and the person who is assessing the outcome is blinded, and in triple blind, in addition, the statistician or the person doing statistical analysis is also blinded. How we can do this? One is by coding the groups. Say A and B. Instead of saying that these study group and control group, we may say A and B. And A could be study, A could be control, B could be therefore the other remaining option. But what is A and what is B is masked, and therefore if the tablets are given, the packs over there are marked as A if it is the patient is supposed to go to the A group. The packs are marked as B if it is supposed to go to the B group of the patients. It may be study or the control depending on the allocation. So coding of the groups is done. Instead of saying that study group or control group, we code them as A, B. They may be coded as group 1, group 2, group 3 if there are more than one groups. They may be coded as A, B, C, D if there are more than 2 groups. The second way by which it could be done, is the drugs are in similar physical form, especially if the route of administration is same. So if it is the tablet, then the tablet should be of equal similar color. They should look similar in shape, rounded or oval or something like that. So they are of the similar physical form in color and all those things. They should look similar, and they should be packed in similar packages. Only the difference should be, it should be A if it is for study group or control group, and it should be B otherwise. The third way of blinding, or the one additional component of blinding can be included, wherein assessor is different than the provider, care provider. For example, we are conducting a clinical trial on hematinic drug. The outcome criteria is improvement in hemoglobin level. The hemoglobin measurement is done by a person from pathology or from biochemistry department. So he need to be blinded. He should not know to which group the person belongs to. The person who is treating the anemia may know these things, but the hemoglobin assessor or the person who is measuring the hemoglobin doesn't know to what does A means and what does B means. So the blood sample that comes to the assessor, that is the pathologist or biochemist, comes with the label A and B only, and he reports that patient with such and such unique ID belonging to group A had such and such hemoglobin level. Patient, the blood sample which was labeled as B with a unique ID such and such had hemoglobin level such and such, and that comes to the individual, the persons taking the care, who knows what does A means and what does B means. So here the assessor are different from the care provider. Then the situations could be there when blinding may not be required, may not be possible. For example, if you are comparing the previous drug was given intramuscularly, and now new drug has come or the new formulation has come wherein it can be given orally. So here the routes of administration are different. The oral, one is oral, in the experimental group it is the oral administration, and in the control group it is the intramuscular administration. So here it is practically impossible to blind, because a simple question like whether you were given injection or tablet would blow the blinding or the masking masking technology or masking method. So it may not be possible, may not be required in such cases where the it could be easily identified as to what was the given in the study group and what was given in the control group. Then the next step is the implementation of the regime. Keeping the records of implementation is the next activity or the group of activities in the clinical trial. So the first thing to be, apart from the record of the identification of the patient, whether the desired intervention was given or not, whether and if not given, what was the reason, that record should be there. If the desired intervention was given, then what was the quantity of the intervention, what was the frequency of the intervention, and what was the duration of intervention given. So this must be as per protocol, and the record should be maintained in such a way that we should be able to identify whether it was given in desired quantity, with desired frequency and desired duration, and whether it is as per protocol or not. So in such type, the record should be, the record keeping method should be done in that way. It should also include the record of adverse events. There could be serious adverse events, SAE, or there could be minor adverse events. Serious adverse events includes death. Serious adverse event includes disability, permanent or temporary, or the serious adverse event also includes if the adverse event requires hospitalization for pre-stated duration of time. If the person discontinues the treatment, that record must also be there, must be there in implementation of the record, implementation records. And if the person has discontinued, why it was discontinued, whether it was discontinued because of any major or minor side effect, whether it was because the patient did not was not inclined to continue in the clinical trial. Patient can withdraw from the study at any time as per his wish. So if it has discontinued for that reason, those reasons must be mentioned. If the person switches over to other group, that the study group person goes to the control group, means that for some clinical reasons the person is required to be switched over from one group to other group in the treatment, then the reason for that should also be mentioned. The record should also contain the measurements of the variables. These include the primary and secondary variables. Primary variable are those which are mentioned in the research question. So the primary variables may be whether the person is cured or not, what was the response to the drug, what was the outcome in that particular case. When the adverse events may be also included in the research question. If they are included, then they become the primary variables. But if the primary variable includes only the outcome, then the cured or not, whether the given response was obtained or not, what was the outcome, they become the primary variable. If the adverse event is not in the primary variable, then it becomes a secondary variable. And so the record of the adverse events, the age, the gender of the person, those records must be maintained. Some of these require repeated measurement. For example, the gender is a variable which will be recorded only once. If it is a long clinical trial, the age may be recorded, long means more than 1 year. In that case, the age may be repeatedly recorded. So some variables may require repeated ascertainment. Some variables like gender may require the ascertainment only once. Then there could be independent variable like regularity. What was the status of regularity? What was the percentage of regularity? And in some form or the other, we must be able to find out the regularity and quantify the regularity. So records must be made in such a way that the regularity could be quantified. This is an example of a record of the variables. The cure is the primary variable in this case. Suppose it is a nominal variable. It is ascertained by laboratory investigation, and the summary statistics for that is a proportion. That is the proportion of the persons cured and the proportion of persons not cured. Disease severity is an ordinal variable because there is a concept of mild, moderate and severe could be there. It is say ascertained by physical examination or by certain investigations, and the summary statistics is in the form of proportions. That is what was the percentage of mild disease severity, what was the proportion of moderate disease severity, and what is the proportion of severe form of disease in the cases and the controls. For both the groups, this information is to be obtained for the study group as well as control groups. All the variables are recorded for both the study and the control groups. Then the drug intake, the number of tablets consumed, for example. It is a ratio variable, it is by physical examination, and we calculate the mean, standard deviation, minimum observation and maximum observation in case of study and control group. That is the summary statistics. So like this, we decide the scale of the measurement, we decide the method of ascertainment, and the summary statistics is also decided for all the variables. This is not an exhaustive list of the clinical trial. You may include few variables and the list may increase in number. Then the step is the follow-up and the outcome ascertainment. So the follow-up and the outcome ascertainment should be as per the standard operating procedures. There must be standard criteria for the outcome, like cure. When will you say that the person is cured? When will you say that the person is not cured? So standard criteria should be there, like the culture is negative at the end of the treatment in case of typhoid. So such criteria should be there, and the record should be made available, and the record should be made on the patient information sheet. Then the objective criteria are preferred rather than the subjective criteria for the follow-up and the outcome. And the criteria for follow-up, criteria for outcome ascertainment should be similar for both the groups. That is, they should be similar for the study and the control groups. They should be in the ascertainment, the follow-up and the outcome should be particularly the follow-up should be equal in quantity and quality for both the groups, that is the study and the control group. The records like identifiers of the participants, the demographic variables, the physical examination record, the lab test records, and the adverse event records, all these forms the part of the follow-up and the outcome ascertainment in a given case, and all should be there on the individual patient's record. The standard and accepted methods should be there for the diagnosis, they should be there for follow-up, they should be there for outcome ascertainment, and the investigations, especially the laboratory investigations, should be done from the accredited laboratories if they are outside your institution. In fact, the clinical trial should have a support from the accredited laboratories only. Then only the results of the study, if they involve the laboratory studies, are acceptable. The analysis, one should take the help of the statistician and the computers for the analysis. The analysis involves showing the comparability of the two groups, that is the study group or the experimental group and the control group. The comparability should be for the intake of drugs and in respect to the follow-up. So that is, the intake of the drug should be comparable, the follow-ups of the two groups should be comparable. That the indicators of follow-up we have mentioned. Indicators for the intake of drug we have mentioned in the variable list. Then the next step, having shown the comparability in respect of the intake of drugs, the follow-up of the drug, we also require to show their comparability with reference to gender, age, and the severity of the disease. Then, having shown the comparability of the two groups with respect to the intake of the drugs, with respect to the follow-up, with respect to the gender, age, and the severity of the disease, then we proceed on to show that there is a difference in the outcome in the control and the study group. So the ultimate objective is to show the difference in the outcome in the study or the experimental group and the control group. But before that, we must show the comparability of the two groups with respect to the intake of drugs, with respect to the follow-up, with respect to the other co-variables like gender, age, and severity of the disease. There are two types of the analysis done in the clinical trial. One is called intention to treat analysis. The second one is called as per protocol analysis. In intention to treat analysis, outcome analyzed is as per the initial allocation, and the migrants are presumed in the initial group and not in the migrated group. So if there are 100 patients at the start of the study and few migrate to the other group, then they are considered as the group to which they were initially allocated to by the randomization method, and that way the analysis goes on. In per protocol analysis, the participants completing a pre-decided percentage of treatment only are analyzed. Usually it is 80% or more. So only those participants who complete 80% or more treatment, only they are considered in the analysis, and those who did not complete are not, they do not form the part of the analysis. Reporting of the clinical trial is to be as per the journal format, for the journal to which you are sending the article. There are internationally accepted, most of the journals accept if the article or the report is prepared as per the consort guidelines, and consort is the name of organization who have prepared these guidelines, and this is the website address of the consort organization, and the guidelines consist of the flow charts, the checklist, and certain explanations, and you should go for this checklist and the flow charts and see that the report is prepared as per the guidelines given by the consort organization. This is an example of the flow chart given by the consort organization. This is the number of the individuals who were found, who were assessed for eligibility. They were eligible and they were assessed for eligibility. Then these were the number of the individuals who did not meet the criteria, inclusion and exclusion criteria. These were the persons who declined to participate, and these are the persons who were not included for other reasons. The number and the reasons should be mentioned, and so this is the number of the individuals who were ultimately considered for randomization. Then the persons were randomized. So how many went to the experimental group? If there are more than 2 experimental groups, this part should be extended over here. So how many went to the experimental group, and how many went to the control intervention? Then how many actually received the allocated intervention, and how many did not receive the allocated intervention, along with the reasons why they did not receive the allocated intervention. The same information for the control group. Similarly, how many were lost to follow-up in the experimental group, and discontinued intervention, the reason should be given. So the follow-up will give this information. Same information for the control group. Similar, then finally we get how many were analyzed and how many were excluded from the analysis. What is the reason of the exclusion from the analysis? Same information from the control group. So this is an example which is recommended by the consort organization, and such type of flow chart tells you more information than it could be actually told in the form of the text, and it is recommended to have at least this chart in your presentation of the reporting of the clinical trial. The report has to be in certain headings. In the introduction, we mention the background of the study and why this study was undertaken. The study was undertaken, say, because the existing drug was more toxic, the duration of the drug was more, the duration of the existing line of treatment was unacceptably more. So these reasons could be given, and the introduction should end over there. Then the material and methods, how the study was undertaken. So the material and method should explain how many individuals were selected, what were the inclusion and exclusion criteria, how the sample size was determined, what was the allocation method adopted, what was the follow-up duration, and so on and so forth. So all these details, it is in fact an abridged form of the standard operating procedures that we have already prepared for the study. Then the discussion involves what is the importance of your observations. You may say that you found that the oral administration was found to be equally effective or more effective as compared to the new line of treatment, as compared to the established line of treatment, which was intermuscular. So you recommend the oral route of administration. So that should be the way by which the discussion should proceed. If there are certain other studies which have been conducted like you must refer them also. And if they agree with you, that must be mentioned. If your observations don't agree with them, you must mention the reasons why the discordant results have been obtained by you. The references should be arranged as per the general format, and acknowledgement should be given. Here you can mention the the registration number, the unique ID that has been given to you by your trial, given for your trial by the trial registry. The common ethical issues, the one issue is the informed consent. This is applicable for all types of epidemiological studies, but it is more so for the clinical trials. There has to be a consent form in the local language which is understood by the person who is participating in the study. If the English is not understood, the consent form should be in the local language. It should be prepared by the local language, and it should be approved by the Institutional Ethics Committee. The form should be approved by the Institutional Ethics Committee. The participant should be given the information brochure, which is in short, it explains the objectives of the study in local language. The consent form should mention that and the participant should agree that the information brochure was given to him or her, and he or she has read the information brochure and has voluntarily therefore accepted to participate in the study. So the consent form must be in local language. The information brochure should have been given to the participant prior to signing of the consent form, and the signing should be voluntary. No form of pressure should be exerted on the participant for participating in the study. So this consent form and the information brochure should be approved from the Institutional Ethics Committee. There is a provision for audiovisual consent for certain indications, for certain things. If the participants involve the vulnerable groups like children, pregnant mothers, lactating mothers, or mentally challenged persons. So in that case, the audiovisual consent is indicated, and this is as per the guidelines of the Indian Council of Medical Research. So you should go for, you should study the guidelines for the consent form. There is also a provision of third party witness. So you are the one party that you are taking the signature. The participant is the second party that is signing. You are also signing on behalf of the trial. Then the participant is signing as a participant, and the third party is one who is not any of these two. So other persons included in the trial cannot be included as a third party. So the third party could be some relatives of the participant or some of the employees in the institution who are not remotely also who are not concerned with the trial. So those persons could be the third party witnesses for the informed consent. Informed consent includes the element of voluntariness, and it includes the element of reading the information brochure, and there should be a sentence that the person has read the information brochure and the difficulties were answered to his or her satisfaction. So these components must be included in the informed consent. The second ethical issue is the economic burden. The economic burden because of the clinical trial could be because of the treatment, because of the follow-up, because of the travel that is required for the follow-up, or because of the cost of the stay in the hospital. So all this should be taken care of by the trial. Those who are sponsoring the trial should make provision for all of these. Patients should not be required to spend anything for treatment, for follow-up, for the travel required for the follow-up, and for stay in the hospital for the clinical trial. So all these must be covered, and in addition some compensation must be given to the person for loss of wages. That should not be exorbitant amount, because that may amount to certain pressure. So some reasonable amount should be given as compensation for loss of wages to this person. So economic burden or the economic consideration should be the cost of the treatment, cost of the follow-up and the travel, cost of the stay in the hospital, and the loss of the wages. A reasonable amount should be there and it should be considered. Compensation should be mentioned in the information brochure regarding the compensation, how much will be the compensation for the death and complication in the event of serious adverse events like death or the disability. In fact, the many trials nowadays insure for this purpose also, and the premium for this insurance is paid by the people who are or the sponsors of the trial. So provision must be made for the compensation in the form of informed consent. Compensation must be there for the economic burden. So these must be there. So these are some of the ethical issues in the clinical trial which must be considered. The standard operating procedures is also one of the ethical issues in the clinical trial, and it is a blueprint of the trial, and it is prepared for the ethical committee, it is prepared for the sponsors, and it is also prepared for the participating departments. They should be given the copies of the standard operating procedures, and it should be available at any given time for the members of the ethics committee when they visit the site of the trial. The role of ethics committee as far as the clinical trial is there, especially in clinical trials. They scrutinize the proposal of the trial for any ethical issues at the start. They may totally refuse or request some modifications, or they may accept as it is. So these are the three possibilities. So with that, they inform the principal investigator the result of the proposal. The members of the ethics committee are the members who are for safeguarding the interest of the participants and they must consider themselves as the representatives of the participants. They have the authority to visit the site of the trial and visit the records related to clinical trial. In India, the role of ethics committee is defined by the guidelines of the Indian Council of Medical Research, and anybody undertaking clinical trial in India should be well conversant with the ICMR guidelines. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the presentation. If you have got any difficulty, you can contact me at apkulkarni@gmail.com. This is my email ID, and this is recommendation for further reading the book Basics of Research Methodology, written by me. The Paras Medical Publisher is the publisher, and this is the website from where you can purchase the book online. The Basics of Biostatistics is another book written by me, by the CBS Medical Publisher, and this is the address of the website from where you can purchase this. This is the second edition of Basics of Biostatistics. So with this, I thank you for patient listening. Thank you very much.